Hey everybody, we're here alive and thrive in Toronto, home of Blue Jays, Raptors, Maple Leafs, and Canadian psychic Lindsy Milne. Welcome to my side of the crystal ball. This is episode number 25, and incidentally, episode number 1 was launched on August the 25th, 2021. Yes, indeed, we're celebrating our first anniversary. Thank you for your support. Thank you for watching. It's been a special experience. We're not stopping here, and we have some ideas and goals already set for what my side of the crystal ball will be like over the coming year. My guest tonight, and we're going to be continuing having our fascinating guests as always. My guest tonight is Rebecca F. Pittman. And Rebecca is one of the most fascinating people that I've met, and I meet lots and lots of fascinating people these days. She has been involved in so many things and successful at almost all of them. I could spend the whole show talking about that, but what we're going to focus on is her success as a mystery writer, a researcher and a studier of crimes, murders, and all that type of thing. This is just a small part of her work, but this is what we're going to be concentrating about tonight. And we're going to be specifically focusing on the history and haunting series of books that she's written. And in that series, there are 7 total books, including Lizzie Borden, as well as the Salem witch massacres. And we'll be discussing that soon. But before we go on to WWRS, I have a couple of requests. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like, comment, say something, about the show, if you like it, or what you would like to hear, or how we could improve it. Make a comment and subscribe to the channel. And if you do, what that does is it helps us get ready for another year down the road as well. You can find us as well on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, and pretty much anywhere else that you get your podcasts. If you would like to get in touch with me personally, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. You can find my website, www.robertlindsymilne.com. And now, let's hear another version of WWRS. Somewhere in the mid-1970s, there was an organization in Toronto called the New Age Center, and we had centers across the country as well. But Toronto was the head office. In those very, very early days, there was a fellow there, his name was Michael Blake Reed. Michael was just a bit older than I was at the time. And he was a trance psychic. I was what they called it a cold psychic. I used to not use a medium, et cetera, et cetera. Michael would go into trance. With the help of his assistant, he would go down into a very, very deep trance, and a group of perfect entities, about 6,500, 7,000, formed a collective group called the Evergreens. And this group spoke through Michael. That group, the Evergreens, had a huge impact on a whole generation of people. I indeed was one of them. One of the tens of thousands of things that the Evergreens did is they created what was called the living philosophy of the Evergreens. And I'd like to share that philosophy with you now today on this podcast. And it starts off with, I am the result of me. I am more. I am never less. I discover newness about me each and every day. I act because inaction is decay. I speak because the words need to be said. I am the right person. I have no enemies, only friends I have yet to meet. I have no masters but myself. I surround myself in eternity. Eternity I command. I exist in the now, the past, the present, and the future. I have no limits, no bounds, no ends. Rebecca F. Pittman is a best-selling author in several genres. Her popular history and haunting series of books have been spotlighted on various TV, radio, and podcast forms. And I happen to know some of those shows and appearances are on the biggest and the best ones around. She's a former TV talk show host herself, a muralist, an escape room owner. We'll have to talk about that, I think. A game creator and a runway model who finds mysteries irresistible. Rebecca, welcome to my side of the crystal ball. I am so happy that you have agreed to join me on our show today. By the way, it's our first year anniversary, so welcome to the celebrations.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be celebrating 1 year with you, Robert. That's awesome.
It's fascinating what you've studied throughout your life. When you were a girl, did you think about psychic things and spirits and goblins and witches and narcissists? And did you think about those things when you were a kid?
Yeah, because my mother had some psychic ability that I was always jealous of. It wasn't an in your face, but it was pretty impressive.
When she needed it, it was there.
Well, it wasn't an on-demand thing. Just a quick example, my sister and I are a year apart. I think I was 7, Marlena was 6. We were riding in a car with our mom in California, and she suddenly swerved off the road, burst out crying, and said, "My mom just died."
Wow.
And that's way before cell phones. And
Sure.
I thought she'd hit an animal. She swerved over and burst out crying. And we were only 5 minutes from her brother's house, my uncle. And when we pulled up, he came out the door crying, saying, "Sis, mom just died."
Wow.
So those things stay with you. And there were other things that she did. So I learned early on there's more out there than I knew.
Do you have any of those senses?
I don't think I do, but people, because every one of the historic haunted landmarks I write about, quite a bit of stuff happens to me. People have wondered if I'm sensitive to it. If they find me a kindred spirit, because I'm so sentimental, Robert.
Yeah.
If I'm around a ghost, I'm going, "Come tell me what happened to you." So I don't know if that's what's happening. I've never thought I had any special ability really, other than I care a lot about people.
You have had a really fascinating life, doing so many things. And writing seems to be one of your big interests. When did you decide you could be a writer?
Oh, I've been writing since I was 8, just little short stories and stuff, but I was also drawing since I was 8. And my first career was painting wall murals. I've painted over 4,000 wall murals across the country.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I have a few in celebrities' homes, and it was really good to me. So my first book was how to start a faux painting or mural business.
That's
because
why
there
that
wasn't
was
a book
there.
out there.
I couldn't figure out what the correlation was to.
Where did this come
And
from?
I am psychic.
So that took off. I landed a publisher. I was Simon and Schuster. I was shocked
Wow.
that there was no other book on how to do it, and murals and faux painting were really taking off. And then they came back and said, "What else you got?" And I said, "Well, scrapbooking's going through the roof." So they had me write that. And then I lived 35 minutes from the Stanley Hotel. And every time I was up there, I marveled that there wasn't a comprehensive book about this incredible place. That not only was it F.O. Stanley that invented the Stanley steamer motor car, but then it inspired Stephen King to write The Shining. So I asked the owner, "Can I write a book?" He went, "Sure." So while I'm writing that, somebody said, "Have you heard of the Myrtles Plantation?" And while I'm writing that, my sister said, "Have you heard of Limp Mansion?" And it just went from there.
And how did you hear about Lizzie Borden?
That's fascinated me since junior high. And so I started looking into that fairly quickly after.
Yeah, you were just a kid. How did you hear of her though?
She was still pretty well known then.
Was she? Okay.
In fact, it shocks me today that some of the younger people go, "Who?" So
Who is she?
Yeah, who is she?
Yeah.
But when you're going through and you're looking for more haunted places to write about, and I always pick historic landmarks that are fascinating in their own right, not just because they're haunted. And the Lizzie Borden bed and breakfast kept popping up, and I thought, I have always been interested in that story. And I got permission from the owners and just
the Lizzie Borden,
spent 5 years on it. What?
Sorry, you got permission from the owners of
the Lizzie Borden bed and breakfast where the murders happened. It is a place you can spend the night.
Really? And people do that?
They do that a lot.
Wow.
They're very popular. In fact, the most requested room is the room where the stepmother was hatcheted to death.
Really?
Yeah.
You found out some new information.
Mm-hmm.
Now, maybe not. So, we do have a younger crowd watching this podcast. Do you want to tell us who Lizzie Borden is or was?
Sure. In 1892, Andrew and Abby Borden were found hatcheted to death.
That means chopped up, right?
Home.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That means chopped up, right?
Chopped up with a hatchet. And it was in the middle of it was 11:30 in the afternoon on a very busy street. Their house was part residential, part commercial, a lot of noise. This is 1892.
Sure.
So picture clip-clopping horses and all of that. And the only two people that were home when they were murdered was Lizzie Borden, who was a 32-year-old spinster at that point, and the maid, Bridget, who had been cleaning windows outside during the time Abby was murdered. And Abby was, she received 11 blows to the head and back in the upstairs guest room. And then an hour and a half later, that's what's so interesting, when Andrew, Lizzie's dad, came home for lunch, he got murdered. And so the whole thing was so implausible. How would a killer come in to that small house, nobody see him, and kill Abby? Would he really wait around an hour and a half and wait for Andrew to come home and kill Andrew? And there were no real places to hide in that house. All of the rooms connected to each other. There were no hallways. There were locks everywhere on the doors. And so Lizzie went to trial for the murders because she was also very conflicting in her reports.
Do you think that she was deliberately waiting for her dad to come home, or was it a spur of the moment, like, oh my God, what did I do to my mother? Oh, I got to do that, or I'm going to get caught, or did she think that far?
what was going to happen that morning at 10 o'clock is Andrew was sending someone to pick Abby up, the stepmother, to take her to the bank to sign over a land deed that would have disinherited Lizzie and her sister of over 250 acres of prime real estate.
Okay.
And she needed to kill Abby before the guy came to pick her up. And so once Abby's dead, the obstacle's out of the way. Lizzie's still in the will. And she was trying to get the maid out of the house before her dad came home, and the maid wasn't feeling well and wouldn't go. And Andrew came home early. He normally came home at 11. He came home at 20 to 11, and now she's stuck.
Okay.
She's got a dead Abby upstairs, and I don't think she really wanted to kill him. And at that point, there was no way out. He would have known.
Okay.
Yeah, she hated her stepmom, and it was well known she hated her stepmom.
I
So,
see. And then she just killed her father.
yeah, he got. I got that backwards. Abby got 18 blows to the head. Andrew got 11.
What? She must have been an angry. Do you think she was angry, or was it just like a machine?
I think with Abby, I think it was the rage that came out and just literally overkill, if you pardon the pun.
Yeah.
But she also needed it to look like a maniac had done this.
Right.
And so now if you've got Abby up there with 18 blows that practically obliterated the right side of her head, you can't just give your dad a couple or it's going to look suspicious. It's got to look like the same maniac did both of them. And I'm sure that was really hard for her. She loved her dad at one point, and I think the emotions that she probably went through had to be horrendous.
And you studied this book or wrote this book. It took 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, there were 4 trials. So there's I read over 5,000 pages of trial transcripts, the police reports, the coroner reports.
Lizzie Borden had 4 trials. Is that because there were mistrials or?
No, it was the proceedings. The first one was an inquest, which they always do.
Right. Okay.
They found her probably guilty, put her in jail, held her over for the preliminary hearing. After the preliminary hearing, they took it before a grand jury, and the grand jury decided it can go to the Superior Court for trial. So she spent 10 months altogether in jail waiting for all of these things to go through.
I see. Okay. Wow. What was it like having her in your head all that time? Did it affect your life, or did it affect your behavior or your moods?
No, the last book I wrote on Pam Hupp, the serial killer in St. Louis, did.
Did I?
Yeah, getting inside Pam Hupp's head's not where you want to be.
I haven't heard of this one. Pam Hupp?
Hupp, H-U-P-P. Renee Zellweger just played her this year in an NBC miniseries called The Thing About Pam.
I see.
It was co-produced with Dateline and Blumhouse, and Renee Zellweger heard about Pam Hupp and said, "I've got to do this movie."
So what did she do?
Oh, you really want to know this part?
Oh, okay. Well,
no, it's okay.
We can talk about the Salem witches.
Well, basically, she knifed her best friend 56 times to get $150,000 of her life insurance money.
Maybe male or female?
It was her best friend was female, Betsy.
Okay. Right.
Not only did she kill her in that manner to get the $150,000, she set the stage so it would look like Betsy's husband did it.
Wow.
So she framed that poor man.
Yeah.
Dipped his slippers in his wife's blood, planted those in the closet, did all this other stuff, and he went to prison for 3.5 years for something he didn't do. Then when they found out, they got him a second trial that that they let him go. They acquitted him, and his lawyer made it clear, I'm coming after Pam. She not only benefited from the life insurance money, she was the last person to see Betsy alive. And so Pam went out and trolled the trailer park and started trying to find somebody to lure them to her house to shoot them. And basically she was posing as a Dateline producer and said, if you'll come with me in the car and do a sound bite for a fake 911 call, I'll give you $1,000. 2 people turned her down, and she finally found this poor guy, Louis Gumpenberger, who had been in a car wreck and had the mentality of a 12-year-old. He was disabled, he limped, he couldn't drive, and he bought it. He got in her car, she took him to her house and told him what to do for a 911 call, but she actually called 911 so they could hear it, as that was her alibi, was the 911 dispatcher, help, someone's broken in my house. And then you hear her shoot him 5 times dead. And in his pocket was a note that she wrote that was supposed to look like Russ, the man who'd been in prison, Betsy's husband, that Russ had sent him to kill her. That was her plan, was to get Russ put back in prison so they wouldn't come after her anymore. So she just found a perfect stranger and mowed him down. And then in the meantime, she pushed her mother off a 3rd floor balcony to get her insurance money and killed her. That one kept me up a lot. It's
So she
oh my
killed
God.
3 or 4 innocent people for their insurance
There's
money.
3, but I'm thinking there may be a victim in Florida, and I've been working on that, trying to find that. So
What are your
yeah,
suspicions
it's
on
a
that?
story that's incredible. It's just incredible, the coldness of it. And 2 of the deaths were for money. So, and the killing Louis Gumpenberger was just to get the heat off of herself and put Russ back in prison. Total stranger.
That's diabolical,
Yeah.
isn't it? Wow.
Yes.
So you're still working on that crime?
Well, I am, because she's in prison for shooting Louis Gumpenberger, but they're now taking her to trial for killing Betsy Faria, finally, her friend that she knifed. And so that trial's still coming up. And there'll be a sequel to the book. So the book's called Countdown to Murder, Pam Hupp.
Will you go to the trial?
Oh, yes.
Oh yeah, you'll get in and be there?
Yeah, I've been lucky enough to work with the prosecutors and the detectives, and they've become very, very dear to me. They've been so amazingly kind, and yeah, they've told me I'm welcome to come. So
that's really fascinating, and congratulations on gaining that trust.
thank you. I actually did a TV show with all of them in St. Louis, and I was so tickled that they all came. It was the first time that all of them that had worked on these different cases were in one room, and that we could talk about all of it. And that'll be one of the highlights of my life. They're amazing men, and they have worked so hard on all of this.
And that's going to be the sequel to the book that you've already written. Is that correct?
Yes. So when the trial's over, there'll be a
Yep.
sequel.
So what's that book called that we were just talking about again? Do you want to say it?
Sure. Countdown to Murder, Pam Hupp. It's on Amazon.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
And your book about Lizzie Borden,
Mm-hmm.
is that on Amazon too?
Yes, that's in the History and Haunting series. I wrote 6 books in the History and Haunting series. So it's the History and Haunting of Lizzie Borden. And those are all historic places like the Stanley Hotel that happen to be in the top 10 most haunted places in America. So 3/4 of the book is either the case, the person, the event, the building, and then the last portion of it is the paranormal activity that goes on there today.
In the buildings where those events occurred?
Yes.
In with all of the books, or, well, I don't know if have you been to Versailles to do that research?
I
Like
was
physically
on my way
yeah.
when COVID hit.
Oh no,
Yep,
really?
yep, had the passport, had the contacts. So I had to, and it's a big book. I had to
Yeah.
go ahead and write it with interviews from home and put it all together. I am going next year and I can't wait. It'll be amazing to see it.
Another one you wrote in that series
Mhm.
was about the Salem
Yes,
massacres.
yes.
Not that many people really know what went on. Most know that witches got hung or killed, and a lot of people thought or think witches got burned at the stake.
Mhm.
And not that many people really know what happened in Salem. And that was in the late 1600s.
Yes, 1692.
What happened?
You have to look at it in context of the perfect storm of events.
Okay.
If you had taken away one element that happened, it may not have happened.
Okay.
But you have to understand that these were the Puritans or the Pilgrims coming over from England.
Yes.
And in England, they were burning witches by the hundreds.
So it was normal there.
It was you accepted that there are witches. And so these people had come from, I mean, this was real. So now they're in Massachusetts and they're forming this perfect community, but that perfect community was also so constricted with its religious beliefs.
Yes.
All you heard at church was the devil is real and you're all going
Sure.
to hell.
Right.
So there was this, and especially for the girls who were, a lot of them were coming into puberty and their hormones are raging, and yet there's no release for it. You're not supposed to sing. You're not supposed to dance.
No
The
being
days
happy.
were just, yeah, the
Right.
days were complete drudgery. All they did was work. You made the bread, then you did it again at noon, then you did it. I mean, and so and at that time, children were to be seen and not heard. They were at the bottom of the totem pole. If you mouthed off, your parents would say, you're going to hell. Say you're Satan's child. So there was no release for all of this. So what happened was Reverend Paris was the new reverend. And
from England, and he's the new pastor coming to.
Yes, he's the new reverend, and they'd already gone through two that they basically just run out of town. This was not a happy village. These were backbiting. These were neighbors fighting. There was a lot of tension. So what happened was Reverend Paris had brought Tituba with him when he lived in the Honduras. She was, a lot of people go back and forth whether she was Black. I believe she was of Indian descent, Native American. And she basically took care of the kids because Reverend Paris's wife, Elizabeth, was sickly and was in bed a lot. And it was Tituba who sang them songs at night and cared for them. And little Betty Paris, the Reverend's daughter, who was 9, was very, very close to her. The other daughter, the other young woman in the house was Abigail Williams, who was 11. And so anyway, what happened was the Tituba was just, every once in a while, she'd tell them about magic. And they said, show us something, show us something. So it was called the Venus glass. So what it was a glass of water, and you would break an egg white into it and stir it just a little. And whatever that, the albumin or what the white from the egg would show, it would form a shape of what your husband's occupation was going to be. Because to those girls, that was everything. You needed a rich husband, you needed a good husband to get out of the drudgery that you've experienced your whole life. I'd
like to tell you about the Venus glass. When I was a child, I was homeless, and I got off the streets by working at a tea room doing psychic readings and card readings. Wow. And at the cozy tea room, I was 15 and a half, and at the cozy tea room where I was, they had this thing called an egg white reading. And what they would do is they'd get a glass of water, warm water, and put an egg white in and stir it up a little bit and give it to the client and their customer, and we would do a reading from it. And that's the only other time I've ever heard of what you're just talking about.
Yeah.
But I've heard
That's
about it.
exactly it. But it took when they stirred it, when Tituba stirred it, it took the shape of a coffin. And because these girls, their dad was the reverend, if he found out they were dealing with this stuff.
Or it was a perceived coffin.
Right.
Right, okay.
So anyway, Betty, the 9-year-old, was very high strung and a very sensitive little girl. And when she saw the coffin shape, she thought it was Satan. It was the devil, because they've been conjuring, so to speak.
Right.
And she started going into little fits. And when the adults started noticing, I mean, she'd hide under the table and she was shaking, or she just she's one of those personalities that took on the, oh my gosh, Satan's in me kind of thing. Well, when Abigail, who is 11, she's 2 years older than her little cousin, sees all the attention Betty's getting, because suddenly these girls who have always been invisible have adults listening to them. What's wrong? Yes. What's going on? Are you, so Abigail starts acting in fits, starts barking like a dog. And at one point grabs the fire sticks out of the fire. They're on fire. She's throwing them around the room. At one time she rushes for the fireplace like she's going to actually leap into it. And that's how it started. But Robert, here's the main thing.
I can understand that. I can really understand how that happened.
Can you?
Oh, absolutely. So the kids, seen and not heard, and all of a sudden they get something they can do that gets them to be the star attraction.
Exactly.
I can see how it happens. Oh my.
Well, you've also got to add in the fact that these villages have been decimated by Indian attacks. And a lot of the older girls, by older, I mean 15-ish, they lost their families. They witnessed their parents hacked to death, their little brothers hacked to death, their homes burned down. And they are now almost like indentured servants living in some of these other Salem village homes. All they do is work. So suddenly everybody wants in on this.
Yeah, I can understand that too.
And so here's the turning point. When Betty keeps acting out, they were saying, what afflicts thee? And then all of a sudden it switched to who afflicts thee. It was that one word. And she was frightened and looked over at Tituba, held out her hands and went, Tituba. And they went, Tituba? And she was an easy one because she was colored. She was not, people didn't quite understand her ways. She had like a foreign accent kind of thing. And then Tituba's like, no. And then they're saying, well, how about Sarah Good? Because Sarah Good was kind of this, she just was kind of the pimple on society. She would roam around, beg food, was dirty. Nobody wanted her around. And they said, and how about Sarah Osborne, who also had a reputation? And there you go. It started with those three. They haul them off. They put them up on a trial to ask them, is it Satan? Why are you doing this? Why are you hurting these girls? And in the meantime, the other girls have now come on board and they're acting out and they're getting out of chores, Robert. Not only are they stars, they're not being asked to do any of the stuff anymore. And I think in the beginning, they didn't quite realize what was going to happen, but it snowballed.
Right. Well, nobody would have understood that then.
So then what happened at this point was, and this is the insidious part, was the adults started whispering in their ears names to call out as witches. It was people they wanted to get rid of, a neighbor they didn't like, a boundary dispute, say her name. She's a witch. And it just snowballed
And
until
just
there were
on those children saying she's a witch, people
yeah,
get
they
busted.
called it calling out. And so yeah, they started just naming names of people that mainly the adults were wanting to get rid of. And they went to trial, they found him guilty. In the end, they hung 19 people, and those girls watched.
Did anybody get judged innocent in those trials, or was everybody guilty?
Most of them were found guilty. The one that broke my heart is Rebecca Nurse, because she was in her 70s, very pious, wonderful woman. She was very hard of hearing. She was sick when they drug her in her bedclothes, and she couldn't hear everything they said. So she got it wrong, or if they asked her something and she didn't answer, they turned it against her. But then finally the judge said, you know what, I don't think she did it. And this is one of them that the girls had cried out against. And it was someone who was a wealthy landowner, and that a lot of the parents were coveting this woman's property. And they let the judges let her go, and the girls threw a fit, and that night swore that the ghost of Rebecca Nurse came in their room and pinched them and tormented them. And so they drug her back, put her in jail in shackles. They believed if you could shackle the person, their spirit couldn't go out and afflict these girls, because a lot of them were saying their spirits were coming in through the walls and pinching them and hurting them. And so they hung Rebecca Nurse and her sister, Mary.S.The. And I actually cried during that part of the book, that poor woman got to finally go home after being in those filthy jail conditions. And 4 days later, they drug her back and hung her.
Wow. How did it stop?
It got
What
out
happened?
of hand.
Was this
154 people got put in jail.
154, and how many of those 154, or ballpark number, were women or
Most
female?
of them. Most of them.
Wow.
The men were called warlocks. I would say by far the majority of them were women. But you talked about superstars. They actually put these girls in a cart and drove them from town to town to point out witches they saw there.
My.
They took them into Topsfield and Beverly and they said, who else do you see? Oh, her. So they ended up with 154 people. And when I say that the conditions in these jails were awful, it was beyond belief. And in the winters, no heat. They sat in straw in their own excrement. It was just horrible. So to answer your question, it kept going until finally they cried out against the governor's wife. And he went, okay, we're done.
Okay, it's over now.
Yeah, that's it.
Isn't that that's kind of similar to the guy, the American senator,
McCarthy?
Yeah, and all of a sudden it was over. Just have you no shame, sir? And it was over.
All those people blacklisted in Hollywood, communists. Yeah. In fact, Arthur Miller, when he wrote The Crucible about Salem, it was a tongue-in-cheek stab at McCarthyism. So
well,
that was good for you to put that parallel, because that's exactly right.
Yeah. I'm really blown away by what you're saying. I've known the stories. I'm just shocked by them.
Well, again, you've got the elements. They also didn't have a charter. They didn't have any government. It hadn't come over from England yet. And someone was over there.
All that I understand. It's just, I'm shocked by the barbarism of it. Yeah. And people kind doing to other people the things that we've done and do. That's what's catching up to me right now. That's what I've been listening to, and I'm thinking,
well, and the main question is, could it happen again today?
Yes.
And in the right amount of circumstances, I think you could.
In the right place at the right time, it will. Well, notice how quickly I answered. Yes, it can happen. And I'm sure there's been times where it has happened after we just haven't known or heard about it, but it's happened.
Well, hysteria can spread so fast, especially if it's benefiting you. And that's the sad thing. These hangings were benefiting these adults. And the Sheriff Corwin, once you were found guilty, he could write out and take all of your stuff. And he did. He would write up with carts, take your cattle, your food, your house. And this guy is making out like a bandit with everybody's belongings. I mean, it's just this most incredible story.
So what happened to these people?
Well, the 19 were hung. Giles Corey was crushed to death with stones because he wouldn't say guilty or not guilty. He wasn't going to play their game. And then 5 died in prison, including a baby. So the rest of them were finally let go when they cried out against the governor's wife. And
I was asking what happened to those people that committed those crimes or did those things. That's what I was. Was there any kind of retribution?
No, but then at the end, which was really sad, 2 of the older girls, their conscience got hold of them and admitted they did it for sport.
Oh,
and the one girl said, hey, we have to have sport, meaning we had to have a little fun. But one of them did come back and stand before the courtroom and admit to what she had done and apologized. Now, they were not formally brought to any charges, but their lives went down the toilet. A lot of them ended up in poverty. Very, very few of them got happily married. A lot of them just ended up in obscurity or prostitution. They just kind of fell apart. And
the adults that did these things, that they got away with it.
Yep. Nobody else was ever persecuted for any of this. It was just like, whoops, it was one of those things.
That's astonishing, isn't it?
It is. And how do you bounce back from that? This is a small village. After you've looked at what you've done, how do you trust a neighbor again? How do you go back to church and read your Bible? And I wondered about that.
How did that happen? Yeah, how did they go back to church again? And
I don't know.
And the minister or the guy that what was the man's name?
Reverend Paris. No, they ran him out of town too, finally.
Did he pay any penance other than losing his job?
No. That's the thing. I don't recall reading anything. Finally, years later, the government did give some money to the victims' families. I don't know how you put a price on a life. But in fact, even today, they're still repaying a few of the descendants, and they have now put up a memorial for them in Salem. But that's about it. They got a few gold sovereigns, and it was like, oops, sorry.
That's really profound.
I think that's why people still talk about it. It's hard to look away from that and think, could we really do that again today?
Yes.
Would we be capable of that?
Yes. How long ago has it been since lynching stopped?
Yeah.
Or have they?
Well, we're still dealing with racism. We're still dealing with outbreaks. And I mean, I don't know, Robert. It is scary. I think under the right set of circumstances, anything can happen.
Yeah.
And there's the voyeuristic part of all of this, that, whether you read a book, whether you read a book about Lizzie Borden or Pam Hupp or whatever, you want to look behind the curtain and see, how can a mentality do this? What happened to this person that they can take life like that with so little thought. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
We're shocked, but we can't look away.
What do you think we're doing when we do that, when we're seeing something like that happen and then start studying it? Or, oh, I didn't mean to be so personal. What happens to you when you get really drawn into something like Salem or Lizzie Borden or the other woman you were speaking about? How does that affect your life? Yeah. Or can you just shut it off?
I don't shut it off. It will make me look at people differently. It doesn't, I love research.
Yeah.
So for me, I mean, I'm on to 2 other stories now in the Countdown to Murder series, but of course it affects you. If it didn't,
Sure.
you've got something wrong with you. But it's like even with celebrities, we want to see look inside their mansions.
Sure.
We want to see how the other half lives that's different from us. And when there's an aberration of consciousness, I think we just want to figure it out. We want to see what in the world caused this person. How did they get to here?
There was a short TV series. The series never made it into mainstream, or like the program didn't make it regularly in mainstream, but on a couple of different occasions, the first year's episodes were all played one right after the other. And the name of that is called The Booth at the End. And it takes place inside a restaurant at the end booth. And there is a guy that sits there and people come to him and they tell him what they want and what they would like. If they wanted to get something, they need money, somebody needs help, whatever it is, they come to this guy and they tell him what they want. The guy looks inside a book, old-fashioned leather-bound book, and he looks in it. Oh, by the way, and he negotiates with them exactly what it is that they want to get. Like this one woman her husband had developed Alzheimer's, and she wanted to get her husband back. That's what she wanted from him. And she explained it to him. He negotiated with it, put it in very clear black and white what exactly it is that she wants. Then he opens the book and says, and he looks at, because he doesn't know what's written, it's always a surprise to him. He looks what's written and he gives them a task that they have to perform. Everything happens inside that restaurant, but the other rule is, and when they complete their task, they get what they negotiated. The other part of it is they have to come back and tell him the process that they're going through and why they're doing it. And some of the tasks that people get are horrible, and they do them to get what they want. And then there are some tasks where there was one task where a woman was a nun, and she had lost she couldn't hear God anymore. And her task was she had to go out, meet a man and get pregnant and have a baby. And she would hear God again. And it happened. So there were several, and there was this one, these are sophomore, there was this one young woman, she wanted to be prettier. And he negotiated, what does that mean? He negotiates it and says, okay, then for you have to, to be prettier, you have to rob from a bank $103,025. And the girl says, you want me to give you $100,325? And he said, no, you have to rob that much. And when you get that much, You will be as pretty as you want. And she kept coming back in the process, and she would describe to him what she was going through, how she was going to rob the bank. And as that process went along, she got prettier and prettier and prettier and prettier.
Oh my word.
Okay. And then there are some of the lighthearted ones, and like the nun, the process that she was going through, because she felt that she had been born to be a nun, and she was a child when she entered into the convent. And all of a sudden she lost her faith. And this had been going on for years. And you watched what she was doing to complete the task, and watched how it happened. That was pretty special. No violence occurs. You don't see anything happen. You just hear the person talk about their experience. And what they talk about is how far they will go to get what they want. So it's called The Booth at the End. And if you Googled it, you might find it really fascinating.
What a fascinating concept. I'm surprised it didn't catch on.
And the way the guy negotiated it was absolutely brilliant. And he didn't know what was, the tasks were going to be, but he'd been doing it a long time, and many times he was detached, and sometimes he had no idea how they were going to handle something, and it wasn't his job to tell them how to do it. And he would always say, you can stop anytime you want. You don't have to do this. And
this is weird.
So it's really fascinating. The Booth at the End.
Okay,
And
I'll look it up.
The second season got really dark, but the first season was riveting. And I learned so much about negotiating and giving information without making a commitment. It was brilliant. I learned so much from that.
Yeah, there's a lot of psychology in that concept.
Absolutely. And being on the other side. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it all these remind me of, which is one of the reasons I understood very quickly what happened in Salem. That's how come I understood it. Just, I understood the concept.
Well, if they had the law, it might not have gone that far, but they didn't have the charter, which meant the judges that were sitting these cases were ordinary men.
Yeah.
They just grabbed whoever they could. Some of them had lawyer backgrounds, but back then Harvard, which was right there in Boston, was not turning out lawyers. It was turning out clergymen and medical people. So there weren't really a lot of lawyers. And so if that charter had been in place, if they'd had a governing body that knew what they were doing, they may have stopped those trials before they went as far as they did. So that's what I mean. It was a perfect storm. Everything went wrong.
What I was talking about is the conscious behavior and decisions that people make when they want to get when they want to get something, how far they'll go. That was what I was responding to.
Well, and if you don't have breaks, if you don't have the mental breaks that hopefully most of us do, everyone's expendable. It's very scary.
It's really amazing how that happens. What's your next fascinating book or interest that you're going to be sharing with the world, or is there one yet?
Yeah, I'm actually working on 3 books at once, because I'm trying to find if Pam Hupp had another victim in Florida, and her trial's coming up.
Okay.
I'm working on another Countdown to Murder, which is the Alec Murdaugh case going on right now in South Carolina. And I'm also working on Harold Henthorne, who pushed his wife off the cliff in Rocky Mountain National Forest. And they now believe he dropped a Jeep on his first wife. So those 2 books are coming out in the Countdown to Murder series. And then I'm going to get back to another haunted historic landmark, but that's what's on the books right now. So
if someone wanted to start off reading your books, Which one would you recommend for them to begin with? Or is there one? Which one would you say, here's a good starter?
I think Salem. I think,
Salem?
yeah, because you not only get a very comprehensive overview of well, it's not an overview, it even includes some of the original trial transcripts, so you can see how they wrote back then. But the end of the book goes into the hauntings that are going on in Salem, and I have a nod to Hocus Pocus and the filming locations that they did, and the sequel to that movie's coming out this year. So I think Salem would be a great introduction. You get a sense of my style, and I love to do in-depth interviews with people that are experts on the subjects. So.
And how do people find your books?
They're all on Amazon. If you just type in Rebecca F, as in Frank, Pittman, Pittman, on Amazon, all my books come up. This will be my 16th book coming out. So that's just easier than listing them all.
Congratulations on all your accomplishments. And what a delightful conversation. Thank you for joining me.
Well, you're very articulate and smart, and that's always fun to talk to somebody on these podcasts that has the background and your knowledge. So thank you. I really enjoyed it, Robert.
Wow, what another exciting, interesting conversation that I've had tonight. My special thank you so much to Rebecca F. Pittman for sharing all her knowledge. Well, just a small bit of her fascinating knowledge. It was really great. We'll have to have you back on the show again soon, for sure. Before I say goodbye, just got a couple of those old requests again. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Subscriptions are complimentary. That means they're free, and they're very important to us because it gives us better, higher ratings. The more ratings, the longer we can do my side of the crystal ball. You can find us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and iHeart. And pretty much anywhere else that you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch with me personally, you can find me on my website, www.robertlindsymilne.com. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. And now, just before I say goodbye, as always, these words: do good, stay safe, and above all, just be kind. Good night, everybody.